Hi, I'm Kerri and I'm going to be reading my story Thursday Afternoon, which was one of the 2018 finalist entries for the Hammock competition. I was leaning against the bar in a speakeasy on 52nd Street, waiting for Nora to finish her Christmas shopping when a girl got up from the table where she'd been sitting with 3 other people and came over to me. The first thing that struck me was her scent. No, her smell. It was a harsh cocktail of cigarette smoke and cinnamon that stung the back of my throat. It clouded around her, lingering on her fingertips as they curled around my hand in a lazy handshake, and dancing along her tongue as she introduced herself simply as Grey. The smile that followed was forced, just the empty casing of what was maybe a genuine warm grin many moons ago. It remained etched on her face, and I took it as my cue to speak. "Elizabeth," I replied, setting my empty glass down. "Can I help you?" She blinked for a moment, peering into my face as if I had just told her I was Queen of planet Mars. Her eyes were unfocused, practically looking straight through me, but once she was satisfied, she nodded and leaned against the bar beside me. "So, you're English?" she asked, ignoring my question. "I love England." "You've been?" "God, no." She shook her head, resting her elbows on the bar. Tipsy conversation with strangers wasn't unusual, and yet here I was trying to determine if her eyes were green or hazel. Something made me want to ask her questions. She drew a curiosity out of me. I studied her as she ordered a drink, a concoction of poisons that I imagined would taste much like acid mixed with paint stripper. "Can I help you?" I repeated. "No," the woman replied as she tried to make eye contact with the bartender, "but I could help you." "Doubtful," was the reply that hung on my lips. "Tell me more" was not far behind it, and "leave me alone" was suddenly nesting at the bottom of the list. "How so?" I asked, settling on the most neutral response I could muster. She caught the bartender's attention again, and upon his return began reciting her order again, twirling one of her black ringlets around her ring-clad finger as she spoke. It had fallen from her updo, but she didn't bother fixing it back into place. When the server started to move away, she followed, trailing her hand along the bar as she continued to instruct him on measures and volumes. I had never seen anybody be so precise and particular with their order here, and I wouldn't dare ask for anything more complicated than a cheap glass of moonshine. I took this time to glance over to the trio of guests at her table. The oldest of the 3 was a silver-haired gentleman with a strong Roman nose and an immaculately tailored suit. The suit, in all its pinstripe glory, was fully visible as he stood, gesturing wildly as he entertained the people at the next table. He used 2 chairs as props, much to the amusement of his observers. He was a storyteller, it seemed, and an exceptional one at that. The seat facing me was occupied by a man no younger than me, maybe 24 or so. He was sallow and frowning, and wearing a shirt stained with either jam or blood. His eyes were glazed over, and if it wasn't for the fact that the wrinkles in his shirt shifted across his wiry frame every time he breathed, I might have wondered if he was dead. The final person was turned away from me, and all I could see was a shock of auburn hair that curved in rich red locks around his or her neck. They wore a dazzling gold ring on their left hand that caught the light as they lifted their glass, and I was transfixed when they twisted around to look directly at me and Grey. They were the most striking person I had ever seen, completely androgynous, totally magnetizing, and before I knew what was happening, Grey had taken my hand and led me away. The rain was bitter against my skin. It was a sunny autumn morning when Nora and I had left, but now my mustard-yellow dress was not holding up on this drizzly Thursday afternoon. I wished I'd brought a coat, or picked up an umbrella, or just gone shopping with Nora and avoided this whole situation in the first place. I wondered if she would panic when she couldn't find me, or if she would assume I had gone home. The thought of her worrying about me was heartbreaking enough, but the idea of her leaving me behind with this strange woman and her mismatched band of acquaintances. Grey yanked me into an alley, a sharp movement that jarred my shoulder. As she walked ahead, I noticed a maze of intricate patterns, almost like scarring, that curved with her bones. They danced over her undulating shoulder blades as she wrenched open a wooden door at the foot of the alleyway, and all I could focus on as she ushered me inside was how long Nora would sit at our kitchen table, waiting for me if I disappeared. Maybe a day. Then she would storm out of there and try to find me herself. Or at least, she would try. Once we were inside, Gray flicked a switch and the long passageway before me illuminated. There was a staircase at the end of it, narrow and tumbling down into another dimly lit room below. Gray almost crashed into me as I hesitated on the top step. She must have been looking somewhere else, and my grip on the splintering banister just about saved us both. "You can leave at any time," she stated, eyes lifting from her hands. "You came here voluntarily, and I'll escort you back to that ghastly bar if you so wish." I shook my head and embraced the curiosity that was clouding my mind. Downstairs I was met by the older gentleman from the bar and his two accomplices. I feared the confusion was evident on my face. "We took a shortcut," the older man greeted me with a smile. "A shortcut?" I pressed. "Where exactly are we?" Gray pondered for a second before answering in a careful tone. "A hideout." "A hideout? Must you repeat everything?" the younger man interjected. "And must you be so rude?" Gray snapped. "Or is that just part of your nature?" Her eyes were fixed on me, and in the short time I had known Gray, I had picked up on her habit of looking elsewhere. It was as though her mind was too quick for her mouth, always scoping out the next adventure. My gaze shot over to the redhead, who until this point had said nothing. I had forgotten how cold I was until I looked into their eyes. Their irises were pure gold, and their vibrancy reminded me of the flurrying embers that spat from the old hearth in my messy living room. My hands toyed with the rain-sodden hem of my dress. Maybe this was more than just the result of a tipsy conversation on a Thursday afternoon. "So," said the redhead, "the purpose of this trip is still unknown to you, yes?" "Oh, she goes by Elizabeth," Gray chimed in before I could answer. "Wait," I piped up, feeling my blood shudder in my arteries. "My name, you said I'd go by Elizabeth. What do you mean?" "We've been learning about you for a little while now," the redhead elaborated. "We then needed to locate you. Elizabeth is your middle name, correct?" I didn't reply. I felt nauseated, like my body was coated in a cold sweat inside and out, and all I could think about was how I'd opted to sit in a smoky old speakeasy alone instead of helping Nora pick out the perfect tie for her brother's Christmas gift. I just wanted to wake up in bed, safe from this bizarre dream. I wouldn't have cared if I'd drifted back into consciousness right there that second, on the speakeasy floor, decorated with a black eye after getting caught up in some fight between strangers. Instead, I stood facing a panel who all somehow knew that Elizabeth wasn't my first name. I nodded, a quick gesture that made my head feel heavier than marble. "Your full name is Madeline Elizabeth Kingfisher, correct?" "I'd like to go home," I told them, keeping my voice measured. "I can find my way back, I just need to leave. Whatever this is, I don't want any part of it." "Elizabeth," Gray sighed, "I said you could leave." "Right," I huffed. "Off I go, then." I was halfway up the staircase when Gray asked, "But aren't you curious?" I hated to admit it, but I was desperate to know how they knew my name and where to find me. As keen as I was to get back to Nora, I knew my mind would never settle if I left right now. I bit the bullet. "You have 60 seconds to explain," I fired back in a voice that sounded twice as confident as I had ever felt in my life. "Clock's ticking." The younger man laughed, rocking back on his chair precariously. Gray turned and headed towards an old bookcase at the base of the stairs, and the redhead's eyes honed in on her feline movements, watching as Gray lifted herself on top of it and folded her legs underneath herself like a child. "Oh, I want a good seat for this," Gray quipped, cupping her chin in her hands and resting her elbows against her knees. "You heard young Elizabeth. Clock's ticking." I didn't know what to expect. Part of me wanted them to announce that this was a surprise party 6 weeks before my birthday, that Nora was behind the whole thing. Her beaming face would have been the most welcome sight in the world at that moment. Another part of me was waiting for them to tell me that they were from the Secret Service and that I was about to be whisked away to some distant land for my own safety. An even tinier part of me thought this might be a practical joke on behalf of someone who didn't like me. There were plenty of suspects in our neighbourhood who sneered at me and Nora as we passed them on the street. However, I was sceptical that our 90-year-old next-door neighbour John would be determined enough to plan a heist so meticulous. I drummed my fingers against the banister anxiously. My name is Death, and I'm looking for an apprentice. This has to be a joke, I scoffed. Nobody's name is Death. I mean, I'm not fond of my own name, but I'd choose it any day over that. Are you in shock? This is the first time you've laughed all afternoon, Gray noted. Anyway, Madeline is a beautiful name, and you should use it. It's not a joke, the redhead, Death, informed me, ignoring Gray. Death is a name that was given to me centuries ago. Now it is growing tired of me, and it needs a replacement, and it has chosen you. Well, I'm not an apprentice, I explained. I'm a librarian. Death does not choose lightly, they said, ochre eyes gleaming. The name embodies only those it finds worthy. It's an honour to be considered. Several thoughts hit me at once. One was how much I hated spending my days in that stuffy library. Another was how desperately I wanted to be at home, listening to Nora talk excitedly about her day. And the final thought was, did I just say yes? Excellent, Death responded. So what does this entail? Will I be sworn in by blood for the rest of eternity? Because if so, I'd like to change my mind. Unless that's not allowed, then I suppose I don't have a choice in the matter, do I? Definitely shock, Gray decided, leaping down like a tabby. Death embodies those it deems worthy of carrying its name, and as an apprentice, you'll only swear in for the trial. Take the first 3 names on the list, then we'll talk. Do I kill people? At least you were told, the young man sneered. I only applied for a job in administration, and besides, a year here feels like a decade. It feels like a century for us with all of your complaining, Gray retorted, before turning her attention to me. Every death is predetermined. All you need to do is guide them into the afterlife and make sure they don't get lost along the way. As an apprentice, you'll live a mostly normal life, like a day job, until death retires from its current entity. Like a helping hand. Precisely. I lead them to the index, where Malachi processes their information. Gray then gestured to the sleeping gentleman, and the lovely Mr. Whittaker here makes them feel at home. Nothing has to be scary. Elizabeth, Death interjected, your word is your bond. I'll try it, I decided, taking Death's outstretched hand. The air that rushed over me was like ice in my veins. It seared every inch of me, buckling my legs and burning my eyes like they'd been submerged in a vat of chlorine. I couldn't feel anything beneath me, just my own frostbitten body spiralling against a void. I'm blind, my mind screamed. I thought of Nora's face and how I might not see it again, her gap-toothed smile, her hazel doe eyes, her masses of chestnut curls, her freckled nose. I'm blind. And then suddenly I could see everything. Like it was freshly painted, clear, bright, and a little bit too focused. I staggered to my feet, eyes brimming with tears and knees grazed, and wordlessly Gray handed me a mirror. My eyes were bloodshot and weeping, but the irises were a deep ochre. Nobody can see it apart from us, she said. They'll still look blue. Right, I responded, still puzzled. So why could you see Death's eyes? Malachi cut me off. Because you were selected as the apprentice. I don't know why though, you're not particularly astute. They help draw you to the client, Death explained. Shall we begin? Okay, I said, feeling the anxiety bubbling in my stomach. The first name on our list, Death said, is Nora Jane Campbell. I don't remember how I got to the speakeasy. I remember shrieking and falling and biting down as hard as I could on Gray's hand as she tried to lift me. When I first froze, Malachi took great delight in reminding me that this was my trial and I had sworn in to do this. But when I found myself spitting up blood from screaming until my throat was raw, he fell silent. And then I was there, standing in the middle of a crowded bar, feeling like my entire world had been chewed up and spat into my face. We're essentially invisible when we're working, Death informed me. Your task is simple. Approach the client and touch their hand. You'll know when it's time. I didn't bother replying. I didn't care enough about Death's instructions to acknowledge them. I didn't know how I was going to manage this, and I didn't want anything other than to be sat at my kitchen table, listening to the radio on a rainy Christmas Eve. That stung the most. She loved Christmas more than anything, and now she wouldn't get another. My heart found a new home in my mouth, buzzing behind my teeth like a vengeful wasp. I forced it down. She was tipsily talking to the bartender, a vision of unruly curls and olive skin and an untouched drink. I took in the way her nose crinkled and the flecks of green in her irises. She was kind and charismatic and everything good in the world, and totally unaware of what was about to happen. For Nora, this was just another Thursday afternoon. She told him about her job at the hospital, our house with a real apple tree in the garden, the burgundy ties she had bought, how eager she was for Christmas, and finally, me. I think my darling might be the loveliest thing in this world, she mused. Better than a real beer, ice cold on a hot day. Most definitely, Nora hummed. No, I don't think. I know. Love is what keeps this world on its axis. It keeps us warm and safe and balanced. It's the most wonderful sensation. There's a lot more to life than love. I reached out, placing my hand over hers like I had done so many times before. She had a dreamy look in her eyes, one that made my heart ache in a way I'd never experienced before. Holding back the acid in my throat, I kept a fraction of an inch between us, and then, eyes closed, I lowered my hand to hers. That may be, Nora said, but it's all pretty unsatisfactory. Thank you.